So what gave you the direction into the ketogenic diet?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So I started that pretty much when I was 16 because
All right, so thank you very much for joining the summit, the Keto Diet Solution. As an expert in the ketogenic diet, we love that you are here sharing your expertise. But I would like to hear a little bit more about your story, your background, what brought you to teach to all of us about the ketogenic diet.
absolutely. Well, I was just telling you, my love for baking started when I was, just a toddler. And when I was about 16 years old, I wasn't feeling well. I didn't even tell my mom, but I went to the doctor, and the doctor told me I had PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is a diabetes that affects female fertility. I had acid reflux, I had IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. I also was given an antidepressant because I was severely depressed, which makes sense. You know about the gut and how it affects our mood. So I was probably 65 pounds heavier at the time. But my doctor told me that it was the cards I was dealt. It was nothing I was doing wrong. I loved Cheerios and skim milk and, all of this type of stuff that was so-called healthy. But that same week, I took my beautiful golden retriever to the vet because she was losing patches of her hair. And the first question the vet asked me was, "What are you feeding her?" Ding, ding, ding. Hello. I was always an athlete. I was one of the best athletes. I went to state for swimming. I played every sport. You cannot outrun a bad diet because being the best athlete, I was training all the time, putting on weight like crazy. I went to school for exercise physiology because I already liked the exercise part, but I tied in the nutrition part. And so that's where my love began for this type of stuff. But what happened was I fell in love at the early age of 17. And when I graduated college, I was a rock climbing guide. I wasn't even a nutritionist, which my whole plan was to be, but we started adopting 2 little boys and my husband lost his job, which really hit me on the floor. And that's when I was like, okay, I need to get a real job. Someone said, why don't you put your recipes together to help raise money for your adoption? And so I did. And then all of a sudden my husband's like, oh my gosh, it's going gangbusters on Amazon. And that's really how it all started. I wasn't following my path and everything kept on saying, go this way, go this way, go this way. And I wasn't listening. And finally I was like, okay, universe, you're telling me to do this. And I'm really happy that it kept making me go the other way.
So what gave you the direction into the ketogenic diet?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So I started that pretty much when I was 16 because back then there wasn't Google, but you could figure out. So even though my doctor said I wasn't doing anything wrong, what causes PCOS? Because it scared the bejesus out of me, because I was like, what, I can't have children or what's going on. PCOS is high androgens in females. You want some, but just not excess. And what's causing the excess? It's clear. Excess carbohydrates, sugar, and caffeine. At the time, I worked at a coffee shop where I drank mochas and caffeine like crazy, and I took home all the cinnamon rolls and muffins from that day. So I was living a life that was causing me to be very ill. And so I had to totally change that. And habits, I'm glad I had to change my habits early on because now I'm getting friends that are in their 40s like, oh my gosh, help. But I had to change early on, and it was easy for me because I didn't even lose weight right away, and we didn't know it was called keto then, but cutting out all of the carbohydrates immediately helped my depression. And so that helped me stay on it because I became a very happy person. Even though I was still heavier, I became a happy person. I started to unfold, and eventually the weight came off.
And that makes a lot of sense because 70% of the serotonin is produced in the gut. So a lot of people feel moody and depressed, and they don't even know why. There's not any environmental factor that is really causing the depression. It's because if we are not producing enough serotonin in the gut, we don't feel good.
And I had ear infections since I was just a baby, to the point where they would bleed. And so I was on antibiotics all the time. No wonder why I had such a damaged gut.
With no probiotic.
No.
Yeah. We're never told to take a probiotic together with antibiotic, but yeah. But there's a huge connection with the gut. Is why I'm so passionate about gut and everything related to it, because you were talking about weight. That at the beginning you didn't lose it, but slowly you lost all the weight. And you know, when people come to me and say, I want a diet to lose weight, there's no such a thing. Even if it's the ketogenic diet, any other diet, we really need to work on whatever is causing the weight gain. If it's the hormones, as you said, for PCOS, high estrogen, for estrogen dominant women, it's really hard to lose the weight. If it's gastrointestinal inflammation, so everything goes along. And actually, a lot of people don't really relate weight with bacteria. I do love to talk about the microbiome and the bacteria, because a bad gut bacteria imbalance is linked to weight gain. Mm-hmm. And there are even studies with fecal transplant that they transplant the bacteria from a lean human into a normal mouse, it gets lean, or an obese human into a mouse and gets obese. So there's really a big connection. So yeah, the diet has a lot to do. So how do you think the ketogenic diet can influence the balance of our bacteria? I did suffer from candida overgrowth in the past.
Well, yeah. I mean, whenever you talk about like baking, we know that when you add sugar and yeast, that's causing the yeast to grow. And what is candida? It's, yeast overgrowth. And so when you get rid of the sugar, and even when people think, oh, well, I don't have sugar cravings, I crave salt. And I'm like, okay, is it salt on a steak or is it chips? Because chips actually turn into more sugar in your body than a Blizzard does at Dairy Queen, ice cream. And so they're like, okay, yeah, it's the chips. And it's like, well, so you're giving that same craving as a sugar craving. And when you feed that gut chips, crackers, all of these carbohydrates, it's causing that yeast to grow and causing that yeast overgrowth. Sometimes people think, oh, you need vegetables for like prebiotics. Actually, the best prebiotic fiber is in meat tissue, like the chicken wings and ribs. If you chew around the meat, the collagen is a great gut bacteria feeder, so you don't have to worry like, oh, I don't eat enough vegetables, or my kids don't eat vegetables. I don't care. My kids are carnivores and I'm proud of it.
Yeah. Actually, that's a really good point about the collagen. I think it's important that everybody should be drinking at least 1 cup of broth a day, bone broth, with all the broth made with the collagen. You have a really good recipe in your 30-day clean keto diet for bone broth, but that's a really good fuel from a natural resource for collagen.
I even made gummies, little like gummy bears from the collagen. You
even have a recipe for ice cream, I think, is with the bone broth.
Yeah.
And that actually it looked weird because I have a sweet tooth. So when I went to recipes, it looked weird, but actually it's really, really good. So
it is.
So it's always to stick to the whole foods instead of buying all those powders, sticking to the whole foods. So it's the best. But you were talking mostly about refined carbohydrates like chips or crackers. But what do you think about a diet that is really, really high in whole food-based carbohydrate, like high starchy vegetables, beans, legumes?
So beans, legumes, even vegetables, they have anti-nutrients in them. Oxalates, whatever it is. You have kidney stones, it's high oxalates. Where oxalates come from? They come from vegetables. So, whether it be beans, starch, rice, even those whole foods, I grew up on such a terrible diet that I'm so sensitive to carbohydrates where I just can't even do that anymore. And guess what? You can be thin and a diabetic. I see that in a lot of, extreme runners or people that are almost running through a bad diet and they're staying lean, or it's called the Asian paradox, where they can eat a lot of white rice, sugary sauces, and stay very lean. It's not how many fat cells you have. Having more fat cells almost protects you from diabetes type 2.
Yeah.
If you're lean and you don't have very many fat cells, guess what? They're going to get stuffed very quickly. So you're lean and type 2 diabetes. It's not that, oh, my kids are skinny, they can eat all the candy they want. No, start them off right. Nobody needs that type of stuff. And you can change your palate.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because a lot of people look really skinny, they think they are very healthy, and then the blood works, they come back maybe with high insulin, high hemoglobin A1C, and even a lot of people with diabetes, they start juicing a lot, like constantly, and that's raising the
It's just sugar.
even more, pure fructose. So yeah, that's the one, that the fat that we don't want to incorporate. So for the weight loss that and the gut and the bacteria that we are talking about, there is also something that can affect the bacteria in the gut, which is called the mitochondria. So mitochondria is a big thing in the ketogenic diet. It's the powerhouse of our body in order to produce the energy. But there are studies already showing how the mitochondria is affecting the gut lining and also the immune system in the gut, so that's affecting the bacteria, or how our bacteria is able to increase the production of in the number of mitochondria. But if we have the wrong bacteria, that is causing a lot of oxidative stress. So how do you think diets are affecting oxidative stress and the mitochondria, a high carbohydrate diet versus a high fat diet?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the type of fats that are in a traditional American diet versus, I get a lot of questions like, oh, am I not supposed to have pork and certain things because it's high in omega-6 versus omega-3s? And it's like, no, you want a balance of omega-6 and omega-3s. It's just we're living in a society that all we're eating are omega-6 fats, and they're high oxidized omega-6 fats that are damaged. And that's what's killing. They're making our cells look like a plastic, because that's what that is. And then they don't talk well together. But besides diet, what I think is very interesting is you can influence your mitochondria with things like exercise. Exercise, I don't believe in the calories in, calories out, because believe me, I was running marathons and I was putting on weight. I was eating just fine. The cortisol had to come into play, but exercise builds mitochondria, and mitochondria is where you oxidize fat. So don't think of it as, oh, I just ran 10 miles, I should be able to eat this many calories. It's not like that. It's more about you're building mitochondria, you have more energy, you're oxidizing fat better, but you can also influence it with cold therapy. This is a whole new, like this cryotherapy hospitals out there. I've never gone to one. I do it outside myself. I have a cold bathtub outside.
Nice.
Fill it with ice water, or you can dunk your face in ice water, but there's a lot of research showing how that is shrinking your mitochondria, which makes it more efficient. It talks better. And not only that, is when you get into the cold therapy, it really boosts your immune system. I had the opportunity to speak in Russia this last November, and we talked about how they have the kids go outside in the middle of winter without jackets or hats or anything, and that's to boost their immune system. It's a common practice.
Without shoes, they get used to. They do it in Denmark as well, yeah.
Yeah, but it's a practice to help get them healthier, which I thought was really enlightening.
Yeah, that's boosting immunity, and that's something that I felt. I used to live in Boston before, and that's something that I feel now living in Hawaii. The metabolism is slower, like because it's always constant heat.
Yeah.
Now that with the summer, so I feel slower. So I feel I'm able to even keep a healthier weight and burn fat faster whenever I have the AC on, or I go in the shower with really cold water. So yeah, that makes sense.
You know, if you think about it, your body has to work to stay warm. If you're always in an environment where you're warm with heat in your house, whatever it is, you know, your body doesn't have to work to keep it warm. And that's why, drinking ice cold water, all of that, like getting your body cold helps with the mitochondria, shrinking it, boosting your immune system, all of that type of stuff. And like the whole intestinal wall, if you think of it like a muscle, you have to work at it. It's just like a bicep, right? Or it's going to atrophy. And so if you make it work with, making it make your body warmer, you're making it much stronger.
Yeah, the only, there are different theories for gut health, but I see in your book that you suggest also like chewing ice, like eating ice at the end of the day.
Well, not necessarily chewing, but, sucking on ice to cool your whole body down and that intestinal wall down.
Yeah, and that wouldn't affect the digestive system for a person with gastrointestinal issues that usually needs to go for more like room temperature water, because it's like the yin and the yang. Like there are foods that contract the digestive system. Also, eating very cold foods like being juicing or smoothies or very cold drinks can contract the digestive system. So how do you explain that?
Well, heat is inflammation. Inflammation is heat. So cold is going to reduce that inflammation. And so, what's that?
Cooling down, yeah.
So cooling it down. I never, ever, ever recommend drinking with food. You need to give yourself a big window around eating. And a lot of people are not used to that. That's a new concept for them, but you need those digestive enzymes to break down the food. So I would never recommend doing ice around food, but away from it, it's going to cool that inflammation down.
So which is the interval that you suggest for drinking before and after meals?
Well, at least 2 hours after a meal, and which can be hard for people, but now it's just a common practice for me. If you can only do a half an hour before, that's fine. An hour would be better. An hour before meals, stop drinking, eat. 2 hours later, drink again.
Yeah, and that's very important to give a rest to the digestive system, but also to prevent taking the space that you need, as I said, for digestive enzymes and juices to be released. But I find that because the society is used to that we have to eat 5 times a day. Oh. I got the question from many people like, but then I'm not gonna drink at all, because if I have to stop 2 hours before, I'm not gonna drink at all. So how many meals do you suggest in a ketogenic lifestyle?
Well, I will say it wasn't easy for me at first, right? But intermittent fasting, it sounds extreme, but it's not. It's just shortening the window so you can give your body time to heal other parts of its cells. If you're always digesting food, it can't start to heal other parts. So maybe to start, you don't have to eat right away when you wake up, which is something that we've been told forever. You wait until you're hungry, and I'm not talking bulletproof coffee will break your fast. That is not fasting. So once you get hungry, you eat a real food with real food, like eggs or something, whatever it is. And then, so maybe that's at 10 a.m., 11, it depends on when you get up. And then you move your dinner a little bit closer, not so close to bedtime. So pretty soon your window of eating is maybe in a 5-hour window. And then the rest of the time it's healing itself. And it's, rest and digesting and all of that. And then there's plenty of time to drink around that. But that's what I suggest. If you can do 1 meal a day, that's absolutely fine. I do find some people have a hard time getting all of their protein needs in 1 meal. So it's easier to split that.
So now that you brought the conversation about protein, because in the ketogenic diet, it's all about the ratio, 6% carbohydrates in the form of vegetables, then moderate protein, high fat. So when we talk about moderate protein, how much protein do you think a person needs?
Well, protein is never going to turn into sugar. So we need to address that. In absence of carbohydrates, do not fear protein. Most of the time people start a ketogenic diet and they'll start losing their hair. they have thyroid issues. The thyroid, your hair follicles, all of that needs a lot of amino acids, and amino acids come from protein. I will say that most of the time, if you've tried a ketogenic diet, you're not seeing the results you want. If you flip the protein to fat ratio, if you flip that, you will be successful. That whole 60%, 70%, some people say 80% fat, if you aim for that, you're never going to use body fat for fuel because you're eating dietary fat. So if you flip that, you're probably much more successful. And like talking about being carnivores, I'm writing a carnivore book now. There's enough fat in a steak. There's enough fat in most meats that you do not have to add fat.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah, it makes sense because a lot of people that get a little bit lost is like, how do I add fat? How do I add fat? Like which kind of sauces and dressings and things like that. But sometimes just basically the protein, even a salmon piece is really, really rich in omega.
Right. And then you'll use your body fat to make, to use that for ketosis. You don't need to necessarily add fat, and we can talk about adding cheese and all of those other fatty sources that can cause a lot of issues. So just focusing on, real foods. You don't need to do a shot of MCT oil at bedtime because you didn't hit your fat percentage, so yeah, you want to hit, so back to your question, you want to hit 0.8 times your lean mass. And so I have a keto calculator. It's free on my website if you want to use it. It's mariamindbodyhealth.com. Search keto calculator.
I did use it.
Awesome. And so I give you your protein as a goal. So that is the only goal. You have to hit that protein goal, or you're probably going to start losing your hair. Other things will suffer. Fat is a lever. My kids, they're 8 and 9. They eat ketosis. I don't limit their fat, especially not their protein because they're growing. But use fat as a lever. If you're not in it for weight loss, you don't have to worry about limiting that. But if you want to lose weight, you probably have to turn the fat dial down. Then carbohydrates is limit. That's the highest you can go. Going underneath would be even better.
So then the carbohydrates part that is supposed to like 6% of low starchy vegetables is basically for a ketogenic diet. But when people see a 6%, it looks like it's almost no vegetables. So sometimes they forget about the vegetables. They just focus on the protein. So how do you really see 6% of vegetables in a plate?
Well, I'll say you never want to focus on percentages because that's when you're going to fail. You want to focus on macros. Percentages, again, whatever your macro is, if it's 20 grams of total carbohydrates, don't get messed up with subtracting fiber. You can go underneath that. There is no essential carbohydrate. That's an oxymoron. So if it's not a goal, you don't have to add in more veggies. They actually, if you look at the cecums, our cecums look much more like a lion's than it does a koala bear. A koala bear is meant to digest that plant matter. Guess what happens in a lion and with us? That vegetable ferments in our gut, causing a lot of digestive issues. So a lot of people do better on a pure carnivore type diet rather than focusing on, especially raw vegetables tend to ferment.
Yeah. Raw vegetables, I call them a weapon. I always tend to say that a lot of people don't do well with salads. It used to happen to me when I had candida overgrowth because if you can't really move all that fiber out, that can cause a lot of complications, increasing even the estrogen levels when you cannot really go to the bathroom. So yeah, raw vegetables are not for everyone.
Fiber causes a lot of bulk to the stools to cause more constipation than not. When people say, oh, I'm constipated, I need vegetables or fiber, it's like, no, you probably need more salt.
Yeah, and actually, could you tell us a little bit about that, about the salt intake when you go in a ketogenic diet? Because for some people, when they cut grains, they start having magnesium deficiency, phosphorus, a lot of the minerals that are important for pooping. So yeah, could you tell us a little bit more?
So carbohydrates, carbohydrates retain water to help with your energy levels, that type of stuff. So when people start a ketogenic or a low carb diet, usually they have heavy legs walking upstairs, sometimes low moods, dehydration, migraines, that type of stuff. it's not that you need carbohydrates to help those things, but what happened is you got rid of carbohydrates, you pee all the time, you lost all your water, all the electrolytes are gone. You can't just drink more water because you're just going to pee more. You need to be cognizant about getting good quality salt in and all of those minerals and electrolytes in. That will help with that water balance. The headaches will be gone. Your energy will come back. The moods will come back. It's not that you need carbohydrates for serotonin. That's not true. But it's, and we live in a society where we've been told to stay away from salt. Salt is bad. But if you look at the breads, the pasta, the grains, they're filled with salt. A piece of bread has a ton of salt. So when you're getting rid of all of those packaged foods and you are putting a little bit on your eggs or whatever you're having, you're not getting enough salt. So be liberal, add more salt. If you're not going number 2, add more salt because you need that hydration. The colon needs a lot of salt. Some people, you mentioned, I do run a lot. And so there was a time when my blood pressure was so low, I had to add in salt tablets. And I was like, okay, doctor, I'm just going to add more salt to my food. But it was very eye-opening because that was, 15 years ago. I was just afraid of salt,
Yeah, and a lot of people with high blood pressure now will be wondering, but how do I add the salt? If I have high blood pressure, how do I do that?
When you get rid of those carbohydrates, your blood pressure is going to get much better. The best thing also is to add magnesium glycinate in the morning because that's going to relax blood vessels. And so that will in turn lower your blood pressure even more. Bone broth, like you mentioned earlier, is one of the best things to moderately increase your salt intake to see how your blood pressure reacts. You don't want to exactly like dump a capsule of salt down. Bone broth would be a great slow way to see how your blood pressure reacts.
So do you think also adding like a little pinch of salt in the water that people drink through the day, that would help?
Yes, it really will. Not as much where you're going to be drinking salt water, but you add a little bit, you won't even know that it's there.
Yeah, just a little pinch, not too much, or it's causing diarrhea, the opposite.
Oh yes, you'll know if you got too much salt.
Yeah. So going back to the digestive system and healing the digestive system. So a lot of people have been told to cut high fatty foods if they don't have the gallbladder. So because they end up having indigestion, and the gallbladder is one of the organs the most important for helping in breaking down the fat and absorbing the fat, antioxidants, vitamins, also for cleansing a lot of toxins that come from the liver, and for getting rid of cholesterol. And a lot of people without the gallbladder can end up with fatty liver. So then they are told they have to go in a low-fat diet. So how a person without gallbladder can live on a ketogenic diet?
Well, the common bile duct still remains intact after gallbladder surgery. Otherwise, you would die. I mean, you would just, not live anymore. So this is why, most people tell me that have had their gallbladder out and they feel much, much better on a ketogenic diet. Things like medium chain triglycerides, they don't require bile salts for digestion. So those are going to be the easiest ones to digest, such as, coconut oil, that type of stuff. So using that for cooking, I would stay away from dairy. But fatty liver should be called carbohydrate liver. It shouldn't be called fatty liver because people automatically associate a fatty liver comes from being fat. But you're familiar with foie gras. Foie gras is fatty duck liver. Do you know what they do? They force feed them basically dried fruits. They did back in the Roman times to fatten that duck liver up. They didn't feed it fat. They fed it basically their candy of their time, which is dried fruit. Dried fruit is nature's candy. Fruit is nature's candy,
Fructose, yeah.
And that's what causes the fatty liver. Fructose does. So don't be afraid of fat. I mean, obviously you want to make sure that it's good fats that aren't hydrogenated vegetable oils. Get rid of all of that type of stuff. But a lot of times, like I was mentioning the bicep, you need to work that bicep to make it stronger. And we are living in a society where we grew up in the 70s and 80s where we were told to eat no fat. And those are the people suffering from gallbladder issues because that gallbladder is so weak that you didn't work that muscle anymore. So you need to make it stronger.
Gallbladder atrophy.
Like muscle atrophy, yes.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So then, which, like you mentioned, the MCT oils, medium chain triglycerides versus the coconut oil. So what's the difference between one and the other, since the MCT are mostly isolated from coconut?
So MCT oil is medium chain triglycerides, and that would be coconut oil, MCT oil. Long chain triglycerides are like the vegetable oils. Those are especially vegetable oils you want to stay away from. But the coconut oil, MCT oil, you want to be careful with some MCT oil because it can cause gastrointestinal distress. So coconut oil is probably the best option.
All right. That's good. And that brings me to being one of my favorite substitutes, like coconut milk, for example, is one of my favorite substitutes for dairy, because I want to know your thoughts about the dairy world that has been there for a long time. But when somebody suffers from gut inflammation, it's not able really to digest casein. And we are the only species that continues drinking milk after breastfeeding. But the conventional ketogenic diets are full of heavy dairy.
Yes.
Like sour cream and butter and cheese everywhere. And so what do you suggest? What is the big deal about dairy on a ketogenic diet? Should we be eating a certain type of dairy when you have gut issues, or none at all?
Well, I'm like you. My meal plans are all dairy free, but yet they're delicious because I'm from Wisconsin, which is like the dairy state. So I understand we want that creamy texture. So I try to replace that missing of that with different types of foods and thickening soups with different things other than cream. This is why I wrote a couple books that are dairy free, because we poo-poo gluten in this ketogenic world, but nobody wants to address dairy. And I think it's because they're like, oh, I already gave up so much, I'm not giving away my cheese also. But until I didn't, lose my weight. Most people don't. Dairy is a more common allergen than gluten is, but we don't want to address that. It might not be bad for everybody. Butter might be okay for some people when we get rid of the lactose, the sugar in the dairy, but there's so many good, delicious, fats that you can use instead of dairy. Lard, tallow, all of those things, duck fat, leaf lard. It's so good to cook in, and we've gotten away from that. Bringing that back.
Think that is raising cholesterol.
Well, if you think about the sheath of our bones are made up of saturated fat. And the sad thing is I know you're seeing it too. We're seeing a rise in osteopenia and osteoporosis. And that's because we're living in a vegetarian vegan society that's so afraid of saturated fat and cholesterol because they think it's bad for us. But I always tell people, you agree that breast milk is the best thing for a baby, right? And then I'll say, do you know that breast milk is one of the highest things in saturated fat and cholesterol? They're like, really? I was like, do you think God had an agenda when he created breast milk? Because I don't. Cholesterol is building healthy hormones. Cholesterol makes their babies gonads, the thyroid hormone, all of these things that we need. And what happens is, especially as women, as we age, we slowly produce less and less estrogen and progesterone from our ovaries. And cholesterol goes elevated to try to get our ovaries to spit out that progesterone and estrogen. But guess what? It's not listening anymore. It's not a bad thing. That's what happens. But I will tell you, most people say that their menstrual cycle did come back when they add in that cholesterol. But which is a good thing, despite what you may think. The cholesterol gets elevated, and the doctor sees that elevated cholesterol and says, oh my goodness, you need to go on a statin. But the cholesterol being elevated isn't bad. It's trying to help your body give you the hormones that you need. If you have Hashimoto's, if you have hormone issues like adrenal fatigue, whatever it is, your cholesterol is going to be high. Don't kill the messenger. The messenger's trying to help you. It's not a bad thing. But I will say that if you notice your triglycerides are out of whack, whatever, if you're doing bulletproof coffee, fat bombs, not living off of real foods and doing, you know, fat bombs, all of those things you read online, then you are in trouble. Then you are in danger.
Yeah, because a lot of people get confused when they have high cholesterol. The doctor tells them you have to go on statins, but actually the triglycerides are perfect.
Right.
So that's not the cholesterol that is raising the risk of cardiovascular diseases. Right. It's the carbs that turn into triglycerides, or the fructose that turn into triglycerides, and then fatty liver. That is the one that is raising the risk of cardiovascular diseases. Absolutely. So that was a really good point. So now that you said about the fat bombs, because I know a lot of women, mostly because I guess a ketogenic diet, women versus men, has to be maybe a little bit modified for hormones and a lot of issues. They say that they start gaining weight, but it's because they are doing a lot of fat bombs and a lot of...
Bulletproof coffee is devoid of nutrients, and caffeine, like I told you, caffeine is going to impact your hormones. So the best thing is give up the caffeine, give up the bulletproof coffee, give up the fat bombs. Start turning to protein, which is going to help. The protein that's filled with the saturated fat, like a big old steak. That's going to help with your thyroid. It's going to help with your, all of those hormones that you're looking for. The fat bombs, the bulletproof coffee is not going to feed that well. The nutrients are in beef and organ meat. That's where the nutrients are at.
Yeah, and that's a really good point about the cortisol. Like years ago, I also suffered from a lot of stress, and I ended with a really severe adrenal fatigue. But I also was like trying to find a way to lose weight. Yeah. And I was doing a lot of smoothies and juices and things like that. So I didn't have enough fat in order to overcome my adrenal fatigue. Right. When I entered into the ketogenic world, is how my progesterone was boosted. It was boosted back again, and my estrogen now is normalized. Everything was normal, and I feel more energized. So that's a really
right. No, I'm not saying no fat. I'm just saying when you focus on eating fat bombs or fat fast or egg fast or bulletproof coffee, none of those things have the nutrients that you're looking for. And so you want to focus on real food that tastes delicious, chewing your calories, that have good amounts of fat in them. So I don't want people to be mistaken saying, Maria said no fat. No, I did not say that. I'm just saying that if you focus on fat bombs, you're not getting the nutrients that you need that you would get from a big fatty ribeye steak.
Yeah. So. Yeah, and also depends on the goal, because as you said, the steak by itself has fat. You don't need to add many other extra fat if one of your goals is losing weight. Maybe you are putting too much fat.
Right. And maybe that's why it took me a long time to lose my weight, because I love sauce. And so when I do have a steak, I'm going to put some sauce on it because that's just what I do. And I make a great dairy-free hollandaise in that book you showed. And so that's how I want to, we almost are given this guilt trip for enjoying food. I think it's wonderful to enjoy your food. You should like it. It's okay. When you think about birthdays, you think about birthday cake. When you think about Valentine's Day, you think about chocolates. You know, like, it's okay to enjoy food, but when it consumes your life, that's a whole other issue. But I want to enjoy my food when I do have a steak, and so I'm going to put sauce on it. But I'm just saying, if you want to lose weight faster, and like you said, that shouldn't be your goal anyway. Let's heal from the inside out first. And so that's what I'm just saying. Just, you don't need to add it, just add it.
Yeah, like for example, that's what happened in here at home. Like I'm, you know, like I work out, but I'm less active than my husband that is an ultra runner. So he adds much more fat than I do as to mine. Like the amount of sauce that maybe we add on top of salmon or steak is different.
Oh yeah. For each other. And they'll eat it. Ultra marathons is a whole nother animal.
So that was coming to my last question. That is like, if there was such a thing of too much fat coming from dietary fat.
Is there? I would, yeah. I mean, if you're doing like bulletproof coffee and fat bombs, I would definitely see what your triglycerides are. I did a blog post. There was a really great study that was done just showing that, you know, that's not a healthy way to live. That's not where, you know, especially if you are an ultra marathon and you need to do more calories, you need nutrient dense foods. And you need to keep your muscle, because at a certain time, you're going to start using muscle tissue at, you know, when you're running those ultra races. And so protein is what you should be focusing on. So.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, because the protein conversation is always like a misconcept. Like a lot of people say, oh, but then if I put too much protein, it's becoming a paleo. So how you distinguish between the paleo diet and the ketogenic diet?
Well, I just want, if anybody wants to see, I did a YouTube video with my husband on gluconeogenesis. So you can check that out if you search Maria YouTube. It's a demand-driven process. And I will say that most people that I meet, that I work with, when I flip their ratios from fat to protein, they are much more successful on what their goals are. And if it's for fertility, something like that, higher fat is going to make a difference. So I'm talking more about weight loss. Don't add fat just to add fat. And I will say 99% of people venture into the ketogenic diet because of weight loss. And I'll tell you what, a lot of people I meet are gaining weight on the ketogenic diet. So I'll just say that.
Yeah, very good point. So to finish, which would be your best advice or recommendation for a person that decides to start on a ketogenic diet and suffer from any gastrointestinal disorder?
You know, I'm the type of person that if you were to tell me everything we just talked about, I'd be pretty overwhelmed in the beginning. And so I want you to think of this as baby steps. Yeah, it's great to rip the Band-Aid off and do everything, but if you're overwhelmed, just know that tomorrow is a new day and you have, maybe make one goal. And maybe it's just cutting out the grains like we talked about. And once you accomplish that goal, add in a new one. That's what I did. I would get overwhelmed with my college syllabuses. And I'm like that in so many things, even running. If I see the ultra marathon in front of me, I get overwhelmed. But if I see 1 mile at a time, it's like, oh my gosh, I just did 10. Oh my gosh, there's 20, you know, like it's fine. So just pick one new goal a week, accomplish that, check it off, make a new one. And then like, I still do that to this day. I'm always wanting to grow and become my best self. And it becomes an addiction that you want to grow and become your best self, rather than I was falling off the wagon, becoming an unhealthy person. And that's why I did cut alcohol. I know you wanted to talk about alcohol, but that wasn't making my best self. No, there is not a good ketogenic alcohol. It's not about alcohol and ketosis. It's about alcohol and hormone health. And so eventually I cut the wine out, and you don't have to do that tomorrow, but whatever you're ready to tackle, make that your next goal.
So there is no such a thing of a good low carb alcohol.
No, because it's not about, first of all, alcohol turns into sugar. Just put it that way. That's what it does. It has one fate. I do a presentation called oxidative priority. Oxidative priority number 1 is alcohol, because there's no storage site in your body. You have to burn it because it's toxic. Yeah. Whether it's wine or rum or vodka, whatever it is, it is toxic.
We don't digest it. It causes toxicity in the liver and turns into sugar.
And there's no judging. I mean, my husband used to make his own beer and his own wine, but that was a long time ago, and he wanted to become his best self, so he cut that out. But what happens is, if you think about men that say, oh, I have a big beer belly, it's not a beer belly, it's an estrogen belly that women suffer from too. That alcohol increases estrogen by 300%, and it decreases testosterone for up to 24 hours. Yeah. And so even women, we want that testosterone to have healthy, big muscles. And it's all about the hormone connection that we were talking about. People think about calories in, calories out. It's ignorant to say that that doesn't matter, but it's more about the hormones and how you influence hormones with what you put in your mouth. Flaxseed, chia, that is all estrogenic. So that is not ever meant to be a food, first of all. Neither is, I mean, alcohol, all of that. Just, we have to be real with ourselves. If you're going to have a glass of wine, I take people to Italy, like I told you. I don't judge, but don't say that this is a healthy thing for you. Like, be real. Understand that it is something that it's for pleasure. It's not for health benefits.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Because a lot of people going on a ketogenic diet, they say, okay, for my cheating day, I'm gonna get this low carb beer, and then I'm okay. But it's not about the glycemic index. It's still gluten, point number one, so it's causing more inflammation. And as you say, alcohol is alcohol, turns into sugar. So it's still feeding the bacteria, the yeast, everything.
Yeah. And the bacteria, the yeast that it's feeding. And I actually work with a lot of people that were alcoholics. And when they cut alcohol out of their lives, guess what they turn to? Sugar. Yeah. They turn to sugar because that alcohol was turning to sugar, and they still have the sugar cravings. They just fed it a different way instead of the alcohol. And so it's a whole supplement mind game of getting rid of all that.
Yeah. So yeah, your advice was really, really helpful. As I always say, patience. That's the summary of your advice. Patience is the key to success in health. We have created certain habits during many years. Now it's about baby steps in making all those changes. To create a lifestyle, it's not a diet, it's a lifestyle.
It is becoming your best self.
Exactly. What is really helping, and in 1 year from now, the person is gonna be much, much different than now.
And one other thing I wanted to say is that your diet tomorrow is going to look much different than it will 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I mean, same with my diet. My ketogenic diet 20 years ago looked much, much different than it does today. But, there's no judging. Just learn as you go and find out what works for you, what doesn't. Cheat days never fed me well, so I'd rather cheat with a big, piece of a ketogenic dessert or something like that I enjoyed every bite of, but I didn't feel awful the next day.
Yeah, that's true. Like the lava cake with the mocha ice cream. That's my favorite in the book because I have a sweet tooth. So that's very good.
My son is from Ethiopia and he loves anything coffee.
Yeah, that's super good. So yeah, we are a work in progress. And as you say, even if we live in a healthy lifestyle, we are constantly changing and listening to our body, listening to our gut. That is what is the most important.
Absolutely.
Well, Maria, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us in the Ketoranian Summit. I'm really thrilled and honored that you are part of it. We learned a lot today, so I hope everybody can, as you say, take a little step to move forward every week. Thank you.
No, thanks for having me.